Greetings, Luang Por. My question is from the Samyutta Nikaya regarding the perfectly enlightened one. When noted that the originator of the previously unarisen, unproduced, and undeclared path, and he is the knower, finder, and expert, it is also commented the arahant, or follower of the Buddha's teachings, though he is a monk liberated by wisdom, is not and never will be perfectly enlightened. And this is due to this disparity and difference between the Buddha, who is self-enlightened, and the arahant, who is a follower of the Buddha and not the originator. Thus, one may be or become enlightened, but not perfectly enlightened. If my understanding is true, can you help explain what the perfectly aspect is and what effect or difference it has with an enlightened being? Well, I would take enlightenment, whether you call it perfect enlightenment or not, I would take enlightenment, good enough. I think the question pretty much answers itself. Partly this is coming or arising maybe out of translation, because this is English language, which is not Pali, the language of the Buddha, so looks like Samma Sambuddha has been translated as perfectly enlightened. And sometimes we say the awakened mind, the perfectly awakened mind, or the enlightened mind, the perfectly enlightened mind is, it's perfect. So then if there's a sāvaka, a student of the Buddha, who's enlightened, you could say perfectly enlightened as well. Sometimes people say that. But in this case, it particularly is translation from Samma Sambuddha, because the Buddha is, like you've said, the originator, self-enlightened, no teacher. It's the one who found or rediscovered the Dhamma, you might say. The Dhamma is always there, whether there's a Buddha arising in the world or not. Sometimes there's Pacceka Buddhas, also self-enlightened, but Pacceka meaning private or different from a Samma Sambuddha, because they don't really start the religion in the normal way as a Samma Sambuddha does. They don't establish Sangha, spread the teachings in the way a Samma Sambuddha does. But they have the enlightenment, the awakened mind. So a Buddha is pretty unique. You only get one Buddha at a time, and the Buddha has no teacher, so self-enlightened. And I think this is where this translation, perfectly enlightened, comes from. Some people then go on to say, well, the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, is made up of these 8 factors, and each of those factors has this word samma in front, so samma ditthi. So some people like to translate samma ditthi as a perfect right view. Samma sankappa, perfect intention. The reason they translate as perfect is because it's leading to the awakening of the mind, the freedom of the mind, free from kilesa. So it's perfect as these 8 factors are necessary and lead, when perfected or completed, they lead to Magga Pali Nibbana. So in that way they're perfect. And then another thing to note is, well, the Buddha said the enlightened mind of an arahant, that enlightenment It's based on full penetration of the Four Noble Truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the path leading to the cessation of suffering have been fully penetrated, fully realized. And that's the same for a Buddha or a Savaka, a disciple of the Buddha. So on that level, same enlightenment, same thing going on in the human mind. The path factors are cultivated to the point where there's you might say, an internal revolution of the mind based on realizing the Four Noble Truths. The mind never falls back from that insight. So that means that the mind of that practitioner is always going to see the Four Noble Truths or understand them from then on. It's always pure, never defiled again, and no more rebirth. As the Buddha said, no more. The house builder has been stopped, no more house building, but what it means is no more rebirth, no more becoming, no more birth, and therefore no more suffering. So the arahant doesn't come back with rebirth, the Buddha doesn't come back. So on that level they're the same. But going back to it, your question, well, the Buddha is the originator, the one who begins it all, self-enlightened. So we might say that's the perfect enlightenment, really starting from unenlightened mind, ending in enlightened mind, but without a teacher. So an amazing thing, and unique and amazing, and a great service to humanity. That isn't to diminish the ordinary arahant in any way. It's just a recognition that the ordinary Savaka arahant depends on the Buddha. So you could go further into translation of terms, which probably we don't need to do here. This term perfect in English may not be the best or the most accurate description, but it's very commonly used and sort of works. So for the moment we could use that. Maybe there's another word that is better. Let's find out. And translations of Pali phrases and terms are always evolving, getting better. So maybe there's more to come on that level. Simple thing is, arahants and Buddhas don't suffer anymore. Job done. Dear Lompo, the Buddha classified sufferings into 8 categories in the First Noble Truth. Can you please explain what does the Buddha mean when he mentioned the suffering inherent in the aggregates with existence, body and mind? So the 8 kinds of suffering, well, I think this is just referring to that description, isn't it? The birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what you want is suffering, being united with what you don't want, don't like is suffering, not getting your wishes fulfilled is suffering. This sort of phrase that we chant and recite and comes up all the time through the suttas. Most people get these things, suffering, these parts of our experience, and it's because we are clinging to the khandhas, 5 khandhas, with the view of self, them being self, or within the self, or the self is within them, and so on. That these khandhas bring up these different 8 kinds of suffering. So our investigation in the practice of Dhamma, developing skill in observing, questioning, looking, learning, is something that we have to develop, directing attention back to the 5 khandhas, which abbreviated become body and mind. So the suffering inherent in the aggregates or the khandhas is that they're subject to change all the time. They're subject to, they're unsatisfactory, they can't bring you lasting, permanent pleasure, happiness in any form because they're changing all the time, constantly affected by conditions, pleasure, pain, unpleasant, pleasant, and aging and degeneration, and ultimately death. The khandhas don't last. So existence implies birth and death, or a beginning and an end. And we cling to the khandhas because that's all we've got, and that's the unenlightened mind, that's what it sees, isn't it? This is what I've got, this body, this mind, this is me, this is who I am. And when we talk about the mental khandhas, mental aggregates, or feelings, perceptions, thought formations, and sense consciousness, we try to get every last bit of juice out of those as we can. So we want to have nice, pleasant moods and pleasant feelings, and we want to do things and experience things that bring satisfaction, pleasure. So we seek these worldly dhammas, praise, gains, reputation, power, influence, all kinds of pleasurable experiences to try and keep the khandhas happy, as it were. But it's impossible because the happiness of the khandhas never lasts. It's just fleeting moments of pleasure that turn into pain, don't last, and bring them with them a lot of burdens. So the Buddha called these 5 khandhas a burden. Who's carrying them? Well, each person carries their burden, their attachment or clinging to the 5 khandhas. Para hare hawe pancha khanda. They're a heavy burden. If we didn't cling to them, there would be no sense of a burden. So an arahant doesn't get born again and doesn't suffer again because they're no longer clinging to the 5 khandhas as self. They've seen through the delusion of the khandhas as something to be clung to, as desirable, a source of happiness. They see the burden in them, so they let go. They've put down the burden through their development of insight into impermanent suffering, not self. And they don't pick the burden up again, ever again, because they learned their lesson. They've been burnt enough times. So Ajahn Chah used to say the khandhas you could compare to a ball of red-hot molten iron. Like in the old days, they would have blacksmiths and people who would make tools and horseshoes and things out of iron by heating it up. If you have something that's molten red hot, a ball that's red hot, wherever you touch it, you'll get burnt. There's no cool place in a ball of red hot iron. In the same way, these 5 aggregates, 5 khandhas, are like that. There's nothing you can cling to or touch with your mind that will bring you any kind of lasting happiness. It'll only bring you suffering when you attach. Even when you attach to pleasure, it's still for suffering because it doesn't last and it feeds delusions and all kinds of problems. So he said, look at them like that. And then when the mind really sees that, it will drop the attachment, the view that these khandhas are worth attaching to, that they're me, mine, myself, drops all that. If the individual is still alive, then they're still within existence, you might say, but the mind is no longer attaching to existence. Say an arahant, while they're alive, they have a body, they have their khandhas, but they don't attach to them. Ajahn Chah used to similarly like water and oil in a bottle. They're both there together, but they're not mixing. So as if the mind of the arahant is there, but the khandhas are there, but they're not mixing, they're not together. So then the mind is no longer suffering with the burden of the khandhas until death, and then it lets the khandhas go, and that's what happens at death. These 5 khandhas break apart anyway, but the mind is not seeking further khandhas. The mind is free from delusion, so there's no more birth, no more existence. Whereas the ordinary unenlightened mind is looking for more birth, more existence, still looking to cling to more khandhas. So you lose one set, you want a new set straight away. So this is the center of the Buddhist path, investigating this clinging, craving and clinging to the khandhas, whatever aspect of the five khandhas you look at, it's all hot, cause of pain, suffering. Dear Ajahn, I have recently come to trust that psychic powers do actually exist, which was a shock to me as I've always denied them. If someone who had developed psychic powers for the wrong reasons wished harm upon us, what could we do to protect ourselves against this? Obviously, we don't even know if this is the case, and we could waste time and energy thinking about it. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts. Yeah, a lot of people do waste a lot of time and energy imagining and thinking the worst about this sort of thing, particularly in countries or anywhere where people have strong faith but maybe not matched by full wisdom and understanding yet. Some of their views may be a bit wrong. People often believe that someone else has put a spell on them, black magic, and making them have all this trouble. It's quite common in some parts of the world or in some groups of people or some individuals. And because you can't see psychic powers, you can't really kind of prove them very easily because they're internal, an ability that comes with training the mind that you can't see very easily. You know, it's just prey to imagination, paranoia, assumptions, wrong opinions, wrong views, wrong knowledge, wrong understanding. This isn't to say it doesn't exist, it's just you can't really tell, can you? And so people love to fill in blanks and say, oh, I'm having this illness, I must have had a spell put on me. Oh, my partner doesn't love me anymore, someone's put a spell on them. Oh, my business is not doing very well, I must have had a spell, a hex put on me. And we love to watch movies and read books that kind of reinforce this view. But what evidence do we have? You know, most of the time it's just guessing. And that's a very dangerous way to be. And some people will exploit that. So they'll say, I put a curse on you, and you can't prove that they haven't. And maybe they did say something or do something that they believe to be a curse. And then you're stuck, aren't you? They've said it, so now it starts eating away at you. And it's not so much a curse, it's just you believe somebody has done something to you, and so it stimulates paranoia, fear, wrong belief, and so on. So this is very common. So generally, in Buddhism, we always start with taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and of course the Buddha didn't encourage people to hurt each other or develop psychic powers to hurt others or any of that. Take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the true Dhamma, the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Take refuge there and then cultivate the Noble Path. You don't really need to think much about psychic powers once you're doing this. You're thinking more about your Sila, developing mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness, right view, right action, right speech. And if your samadhi gets good, you may develop some psychic ability or a lot of psychic ability. Depends on somebody's bharami and a number of different conditions. But you don't really need to think much about that. More just come back to the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and keep developing that. And as I said, you may, or someone else may, develop psychic ability from that. If you're keeping precepts, you're not going to create the causes for people to come and harm you. if you are keeping the precepts just like people in society, they generally don't harm people who have precepts because there's no cause. If you're not abusing, arguing, fighting, cheating, lying, stealing and all this, then people just leave you alone. That's just how it works, isn't it? That's karma. Maybe you have some old karma that comes back, so sometimes things do happen, I know. But generally speaking, if you keep the 5 precepts, you're no longer creating the causes for this kind of thing to happen. It's a protection. So if you take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, keep the precepts, practice mindfulness, reflect on the Dhamma regularly, listen to the Dhamma, respect the Dhamma, associate with good people, Kalyana Mitta, Sangha, laity who are Kalyana Mitta, you're constantly minimizing the chances and the cause of meeting people who wish you harm, whether it's physical harm or cheating you or even putting spells or using psychic powers on you. So it almost becomes an irrelevant thing. That isn't to say it doesn't exist, it just isn't part of your life and you don't have much to do with this sort of thing. So that would be my recommendation. Take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, follow the Noble Eightfold Path, and you shouldn't have much issue with all of this. Even if you believe someone has put a spell on you, still do this. Take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, keep the precepts, practice metta, brahmaviharas, karuna, mudita, upekkha. These are the protections against this kind of thing. You're not giving cause for this kind of bad karma to come your way. And if it has come your way, it would fade very quickly. That's my experience. People, once they take refuge in the Buddha, keep the precepts, all this sort of thing becomes unimportant. It may take a little while for their views to adjust, but this is what seems to happen. And it can be very quick as well. I know people who think they're under a spell, they keep the precepts, do a retreat, start practicing Dhamma, offering dana, going to temples and mixing with fellow practitioners, and the whole thing drops from their life. As far as people who have got the skill with psychic power and then misuse it to harm others, cheat others, there's many levels of that. There's the course level, which probably, the course level means their psychic ability is going to be minimal course, but you could have someone has a gatha, a verse that they use and they want to get someone, so there are a lot of anger or jealousy maybe. It does happen perhaps. Again, keeping precepts is the best protection. Sometimes you get the subtle kinds of harm where somebody is very skilled with samadhi and has psychic ability, but they still have conceit. And they think they're better than others, so they look down on others and sometimes want to prove that by using their psychic ability to put someone in their place or show off. That does happen, but not very much. So generally, psychic ability, if it comes, is used, or it comes from people who have developed their mind in a good way, generally, develop samadhi, sila and samadhi, and then it can be used to teach, to help people. And this is definitely something that exists in the world, because I've had experience of it, other monks have. Sometimes you see or witness a monk helping someone, teaching them maybe by understanding their mind very quickly and pointing out their defilement or where they're thinking wrong. Sometimes they use psychic powers to reveal something that really makes sense to that person, helps them to clear up their doubts or their wrong views, reveal something about karma or some relationship or some action they've done wrong that they thought was right. So many ways psychic powers can help teach people, sometimes just to inspire faith. So what could I give as an example of that? Sometimes it just happens. I'm not sure whether the teacher deliberately does something or it just happens because of the power of their mind. So someone like Lumpur Plian was always having kind of unusual things happen around him, and I was never sure whether he deliberately did them. So the famous one was when he disappeared on various photographs that were taken, and people were taking photographs of him and he just disappeared and didn't appear on it. You could say it was a technical fault, and maybe it was, but this sort of thing would happen with Lumpur Plian. I once recorded a talk of his and translated and recorded it, and then at the end played it back and there was nothing on the recording. Never happened with other teachers, only him. Machinery would break, cars would stop working, aircon would stop working, microphones would stop working around him. All the kind of electrical technology would sort of collapse around him for some reason, and then he'd go away and then it would all work again perfectly. That seemed to happen a lot. Predictions, his predictions, and other teachers sometimes made predictions which came true, and you could say coincidence, or educated guess, maybe it was, but some of them were so accurate and so specific, it was like, how would they know that? So this monastery is one example. Lumpur Plian pointed out that the spot we were going to originally build this hall would not be the spot that we finally built the hall. We had a plan and we put it into the council and they approved it, and we thought the spot over the hill is where we're going to build the hall. But we didn't. When the time came, we bought a new piece of land, and he had said, you actually build the hall next to a pond. And over the hill where we were going to build it originally, there was no pond. And then we bought this piece of land and we ended up building this hall next to a pond. So his prediction came true. And similar things like the permit application that we put in for this monastery, he said, you'll get your permit approved, but it'll be 8 to 1. There'll be one in opposition or one objection. And that was true. Turned up 8 to 1. And so on. Things are like that. People, teachers, sometimes they use their psychic powers to know someone's barami, someone who has a lot of barami, maybe they can help them, encourage them to meditate more and do things. Sometimes with very little barami, they say, this person, maybe you're not ready to meditate. Sometimes someone has suffering and they can just work out using psychic powers what the suffering is, teach them. Sometimes they teach them where they're wrong thinking. So like there was one monk who kept thinking of his old girlfriend, wouldn't let go, but he was a monk, and it was, it's time to let go of your old girlfriend once you're a monk. But he wouldn't, and he was kept finding excuses to contact her, see her, she would see him, and this was going on for a year or two, and then a teacher just one day just told him, it's time to stop meeting this girl. And he hadn't told the teacher. He said, how do you know? All that kind of thing. Sometimes people's defilements which they're shy or embarrassed about, they're hiding, the teacher brings out into the open for them to consider, understand, and maybe go beyond, let go. It can help. Sometimes the teacher does it, as I said, for faith. Maybe they can make auras of light appear. People see auras of light or appear on a photograph. People get faith. Predictions, sometimes on a worldly level. Like there was one expert meditator who had fourth jhana and a lot of psychic powers, a lady I knew. She would sometimes say funny things just to lighten the mood and also show people what she could do. So I remember she was ill in hospital, went to visit her in hospital with a few monks, and in the hospital they always have these TVs on, and it was the World Cup. Some of the junior monks couldn't resist turning to look at the match on the TV that was going on, and it was the favourites for the World Cup, or the hosts, or the favourites, and they were losing. And one of the monks said, oh, the favourites are losing, that's a surprise. And then the lady who was lying in bed, ill, but had great psychic powers, said, don't worry, they'll score a goal in a minute and win the match. So we're just sitting there talking to her, and within 15 minutes the match had turned around and the host won. You could say a coincidence, an educated guess, or you could say she seemed to know. But sometimes these psychic powers are displayed so often and so accurately and so well that, after a while you can't really dispute them, or it's difficult to dispute them. Over the years, seen many things like that. There's one novice with fourth jhana, sitting in a hall at Wat Map Jan. All the monks left at the end of the evening program to go away, and I used to stay on and meditate longer. I like to do that, and sometimes other monks or novices would. And this time, 2 novices carried on sitting as well. One of them who had psychic powers. I was sitting, these 2 novices were sitting, and the lights were turned off, so it was completely dark. And Ajahn walked out of the hall to sit on a bench to give some teaching to a lay visitor who came to the monastery. All the other monks left. So Ajahn was sitting in the dark, and we were just meditating, and Ajahn voice, we heard him say, "Oh, is there anyone there? Could you turn the light on?" Because he was sitting in the dark and he didn't want to sit in the dark. So I was about to get up and go and turn the light on physically, and it was at the back of the hall, so it's about 10, 15 meters away. And the other 2 novices were sitting there. They also heard him, and they turned round like me. And one novice used his elbow to dig the other novice in the ribs, the way school kids will before they do a prank or show off in some way. So, watch this kind of thing. And the one novice looked at the light switch, and it turned on. I didn't have to get up, they didn't get up, Lumpo Anand didn't get up, nobody got up, but the light switch went on when he looked at it. So you could say technical fault, you could say a glitch, a coincidence, say whatever you want, but we believe it was him using his jhana to get that to happen, and you can do that. So sometimes it can be fun with people with psychic powers. Better to use them for fun and for faith and for helping people rather than to hurt people and try and control people or put spells on them. Sometimes you can't tell, but if it's a monk with sila, it's always for a good reason, but sometimes it can be a little bit disconcerting. So Lumpur Tongrat, one of Lumpur Cha's teachers, was famous when the guy came into the monastery, the thief came in to rob the monastery. And Lumpur Tongrat knew this guy's intention was wrong. And in those days, the monastery he lived in was just forest. There's no roads and paths. It was a very simple hermitage he was living in. I'm not sure what there would be to steal, but maybe there's something. This guy comes in to steal, and straight away he gets all blurry. He's awake, but he's lost his direction, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what he's doing. And he met some monks, and he just said, "I don't know what I'm doing here. Which is the way home? Help me." And they said, "Oh, you go this way." And they kind of followed him and watched what he was up to, and he just sort of kept stumbling out of the forest, bumping into trees, tripping over, getting lost, coming back, going, until eventually got out of the forest and went back to the village, empty-handed. So he didn't steal anything. And when he got back to the village, he sort of recovered his senses, and he told his friends, "I was going to steal from the monastery, but I just went all blurry and I couldn't do it." So they were shocked, so they told the monks. And Lumpur Tongrat had used his samadhi to kind of hypnotize the guy and just make him go blurry so he couldn't steal, to help him not make bad karma. And I've seen that a number of occasions. Monks use their jhana to stop someone doing something bad by confusing them. So it sounds like they're doing something wrong, but they're not. They actually have a good intention. Or even one monk who was so strong and so aggressive as a young monk, very healthy, strong, who liked to physically intimidate other monks sometimes when he got angry. So a lot of people were very kind of annoyed with him. One time he was being very intimidating, and another monk I know who had jhana said, "If you don't stop, I'll just remove all your energy and so you can't do anything." And he said, "No, you can't. You're just saying that." He wouldn't believe. He's very conceited. And the monk said, "No, I can. You should be careful. I can really do it." And he said, "No, you can't." 2 or 3 times he disputed the monk's ability to do it, and the monk kept saying, "No, I'll do it. If you're stubborn and you keep causing trouble, I'll do it." He said, "Go and then prove it," in the way a kind of stubborn person might. So I did. He pulled all his energy, using his jhana, he focused on his citta and pulled all his mental energy from him. It didn't physically hurt him or harm him in any way. He just pulled out all his kind of life force, all his energy, samadhi energy from him. And the monk collapsed to the ground. And he knew what was going on. He said, "Stop, stop, 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 I believe you." So in one moment he went from being very arrogant, aggressive, stubborn, proud, to being very humble, respectful, and he stopped his bad behavior. And he never forgot that lesson either. And no one around there forgot it either. So energy can be kind of pulled from you. If someone has jhana, they can do many things. I could go on all night talking about it, but just to say it's possible. And so this is the purpose of psychic powers. It's to help teach people to let go of their defilements in one way or another, their wrong views, their doubts, their laziness, their this, their that. Last question. Dear Luang Por, if the 5 aggregates are impermanent and vijnana is one of the aggregates, why does our stream of consciousness still follow us into our next life? Is the stream of consciousness recorded in the mind? Yes, sort of. There's a problem here always with language and convention, because a person we talk about as a person with a name and a personality, and it's convenient to do that. When of course when we practice developing sati and samadhi and panya, insight and true insight, we know there's no person. The aggregates are a collection of physical, mental elements coming together, interacting, changing. So you could say life is really a process of interacting elements, and that gives rise to the fact that consciousness is there, but it's a chain of consciousness, individual moments of consciousness linked together one after another. So although you can say there's a person, this person is made up of individual moments of consciousness. Even physical form is constantly changing, and then mental activity is changing. And so death is simply one part of that chain from one life to another, linked by rebirth, linking consciousness, patisandhi vijnana, until one reaches nibbana, when that chain is broken and the karma-making, I-making, self-making part of karma is gone. So consciousness is no longer born and dying. So we say a stream of consciousness, could say a chain of consciousness. Or like a river we call a stream, a mountain stream. We have a mountain stream in the monastery. It looks kind of like a thing. We call it a stream. It has a name, you can look at it, it seems like a continuous flow of water, it seems like something. But actually it's made up of individual atoms and molecules of water with other things in it, bits of dirt and animals and stuff. And every bit of water is separated from all the other bits. So it looks like a thing, but it's actually individual bits of water, water element joined up. And the stream is constantly moving, so it's never the same thing. It's like a process of moving water, one bit leading on to the other or pushing the other down the hill. So we call it and give it a name, call it a stream, but there's actually many little things interacting and conditioning, affecting each other. Life is like that, the aggregates are like that. Except for normally we're not sharp enough, clear enough to realize or see that fully. We can understand the concept, but we miss it. When you're suffering, it's because you're attaching to one part or one aspect of the khandhas as self. If you really knew that the khandhas were not self, that they're impermanent, a kind of a flow of impermanent energy, you wouldn't grasp at suffering, you wouldn't suffer if you really saw that. But we suffer because we keep grasping, at a thought. I am this thought, I am this feeling, I am this body, and we suffer. So if you can really see impermanence, suffering, not self, the three universal characteristics, you wouldn't suffer, you wouldn't grasp at the five khandhas as self. So this is what we've got to investigate. We've got to ask questions, look more deeply, and it will reveal these truths. So why does consciousness follow us to our next life? It's because we're still clinging to something or other, probably a whole lot of things we're clinging. And so that clinging takes us into the next life. One moment of consciousness can be full of clinging, and that clinging conditions the next moment, so the next moment is full of clinging. If one moment of consciousness is without clinging, that can condition non-clinging, and again, that keeps going on. In the end you reach Nibbana. So we practice non-clinging as much as possible. So it's really up to us how we look at things and treat these khandhas and how we use them to get out of suffering. Most of the time we're just stuck in the world, earning a living, doing things, families, pleasure-seeking, travel, suffering in different ways. So we need to practice more. Listen to the more of the Dhamma and then practice more. This will help. So that's the end of tonight's Q&A session, so we'll leave it there.